It's officially official. The Blue Jackets have a brand new president of hockey operations and general manager in Don Waddell. What does this mean for the Blue Jackets? What does this mean for the future? We're going to talk about all of that on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Joe Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, print an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We're talking about Don Waddell, who it came out late last week that he was going to be named to the Blue Jackets front office. There was some speculation about what his official title was going to be. And then I believe all of this happened at like 3 p.m. on Friday before a holiday weekend. So we've been sitting here for 3 days waiting for everything to be official, but it's official. He's going to be the president of hockey operations and the GM for now, which means I think he's going to be in charge of hiring a new GM, which is fun and exciting, and I'll get into why that is in a minute. In terms of other news, just to like wrap it all up, he's also going to be serving as an alternate governor, and it's a multi-year contract, so he's going to be around for a while unless things go extremely badly, extremely fast. This is the future decision maker for the Blue Jackets. John Davidson has been the club president of hockey operations for 10 of the past 12 years. He took a brief break to go to New York for 2 years, and then stepped down in New York and came back here. Has agreed to serve as senior advisor and also alternate governor. So he's kind of moving a little bit sideways, a little bit down, or a little bit up, I guess, technically, but I think it's pretty clear. Don Waddell is still going to be the main guy, which I think is good news. I feel pretty okay with this hire. He was not one of my top choices. He wasn't even really on my radar at first until the Hurricanes got kicked out of the playoffs, and then all of a sudden things started moving very, very fast. So I guess he was like at the top of their list right from the very beginning. And I know we all had conversations about, we want Tulski, we want Dash, we want maybe Mark Hunter from the London Knights. There was a lot of talk about Ken Holland, Mark Bergevin interviewed, but apparently didn't do a good enough job. I shouldn't say that. I should knock on wood about that, because I think the desire is that Waddell is going to probably hire a GM at some point down the line, whether that's when the guy that he wants is available, whether they're looking for someone to kind of move up in the organization. I know a lot of people have mentioned like Rick Nash as an AGM to be groomed for becoming actual GM. Obviously, he was just GM of Canada at the World Championship. So like he's moving in those kind of steps, So, but the point is, I'm pretty happy with this. Like I said, wasn't first on my radar, wasn't first on my list. But having talked to a handful of people who, are kind of tapped into the Hurricanes media circles, a couple of like fans, couple of the smart general hockey people, like everyone seems pretty optimistic about this hire. And we'll get into a couple of reasons for this. The first one for me is, this is a man who, obviously, we talk a lot about, he doesn't do any work in Carolina. All of his work was done by Tulski or the AGM, or Darren York is their head of scouting. And so everyone says that he handles the draft, and Don Waddell is just kind of there to be officially in charge or whatever it is. And like, I get that as a thought process. I can see being underwhelmed by this when you want, potentially the real decision maker. And I guess we'll see in the season to come how much Eric Tulski was doing for Carolina and how much Don Waddell was doing for Carolina. And it reminds me a little bit of seeing how much Andrew Brunette did for New Jersey in that year that he was their assistant coach. and they were really good. And then obviously he left, and I think Lindy Ruff kind of didn't really have anyone to fall back on in that regard. So it's not exactly the same situation, but I think I'm interested to see what those two are like separate from each other, and of course Eric Tulke might not get the job in Carolina. He's been named interim GM, but there's some speculation that he's going to be not the new GM, which is an interesting choice. I don't know that I would make Carolina, but you do you. Anyway, the reason I bring all of this up is that Don Waddell is a guy that has hired smart people and has hired good people. He has been he brought Tulsky into the mix. His head of scouting is very good. Rod Brindamore has been a very good coach for a very long time. I know there was a lot of people speculating that, like, oh man, what if the Blue Jackets got the GM of the Hurricanes and he brought the head coach with him, and then we got Rod Brindamore for the Blue Jackets as well? That's not going to happen. He has signed his extension in Carolina, so that pipe dream is over. But he was put in place by Waddell. So he's got a track record of hiring good people and hiring smart people, and I feel pretty optimistic about this for that reason. The other reason that this is not so much a good, like, a reason that this hiring is good, but a reason that this hire interests me. Carolina Hurricanes management, or ownership, excuse me, is notoriously hands-on and has hard lines that they play with money being spent. And I think that the Carolina Hurricanes owner, Tom Dundon, being cheap is kind of over-exaggerated a little bit. But I am interested to see what Waddell does now that he has an owner in John McConnell who is notoriously hands-off and kind of just lets the hockey team run itself. He's not super involved. He's not... I think a lot of things was, and let me pull up a text that I got from my friend about this, because I think that was, Dundon is pretty hands-on, and they do take a pretty hard line on player value, but they do pay if they think someone is worth it. So a lot of, I think one of the criticisms of Waddell, which is not necessarily Waddell's fault, is, letting guys like Vincent Trocheck walk, because he wanted more money than the ownership was willing to give him. And I think that'll be interesting to see with a bunch of RFAs coming up for the Blue Jackets. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what Waddell does to all of this. And I hope that he is ready and he's going to hit the ground running immediately, because he has got a lot of work to do. And we'll talk about a little bit about what some of that work is in a second. I also want to talk about what this means for other front office staff. So people like Mike Priest, who is currently the president for the Blue Jackets. People like Pascal Vincent is not really front office staff, but I guess management staff is what I want as opposed to front office staff. So we're going to talk about those guys and what this hire means for them in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about Game Time. The NBA Finals are soon. I think they just got decided recently, which is really, really exciting. Obviously, the NHL playoffs are going strong. And if you want tickets to any of these things, don't go to any other ticketing service. Go to Game Time. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. They've got last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat. They've got a lowest price guarantee. So Game Time is taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. And it's not just sports. They've got comedy. They've got theater. They've got music. They've got all kinds of things. If you want to buy a ticket for something, you can get it at Game Time. I mentioned the lowest price guarantee. If you find tickets in your section and row for less, Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference, which is just so good. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you don't get surprised by giant concrete pillars in front of your seat. And they've got the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We've talked a little bit about what I like about this hire for the Blue Jackets. Don Waddell, new president of hockey operations and GM. And I want to talk a little bit about what this means for other front office staff. A couple of the more notable ones. Mike Priest, who is currently the president of the Blue Jackets organization. There was some speculation that he would either be stepping away or moving to a different department or maybe even stepping down completely. That hasn't happened yet. I wonder if Don Waddell is thinking about moving up as he stays with the Blue Jackets. I think there's a real desire here for him to be the guy in Columbus, which I do think is interesting. There was a lot of speculation that what if Waddell comes in, takes Priest's job, and then they bring in somebody else for the president of hockey operations, someone else for the GM. I know there was speculation that Ken Holland and Brad Holland would be joining the Blue Jackets. I hope that's not the case. I think it's less likely now because I don't think Holland would leave a cushy situation like Edmonton where he makes all of the decisions for somewhere like Columbus where he would only be the GM. So I think that has really kind of put that rumor to sleep, which is great. 10 out of 10 for me. The other guy that I think his job might be a little bit in jeopardy, although I'm not 100% on this, is Pascal Vincent. I could see a world where Don Waddell has come in. He's got a guy that he wants to bring in as coach, and that's goodbye to Pascal Vincent. I think it would be easy to shunt him off. I think it would be, if it's going to happen, it'll happen sooner rather than later. I don't think they'll drag it out. That might even be his first thing is like, right, okay, get rid of this guy, bring in a coach that he wants, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I was kind of interested to see what year 2 of Pascal Vincent is like. I think he got dealt a bad hand by coming in suddenly and not having time to prep. I think last year was a bit of a shock to the system for him, and I would be interested to see what he does after a summer of being able to actually prep as the head coach and knowing what didn't work last year, so to speak. That being said, I could see a world where they keep him. He's got 1 year left on his contract. The Blue Jackets are not expected to contend next season. I wonder if he stays. And again, Waddell has someone in mind for coaching that that has already been hired by somebody else that isn't available this year, or maybe he has someone that he wants to move in next season. So we'll see how the Pascal Vincent news goes, but I am expecting that to be. He'll either say one way or the other. I suspect in his press conference tomorrow, someone will ask the question. He has at 11 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, I believe. There's going to be an introductory press conference. I am 100% sure that someone will ask about the coaching staff, and I think we'll get our news one way or the other. If he says yes, he's staying, then he's staying. And if he says literally anything else, like, oh, we're going to look at all of our options and we're going to keep our options open, or I haven't talked to Pascal yet, I'm going to talk to him and see what he thinks, like get a read on him. If he says literally anything other than a point blank, yes, he's staying, my guess is he's gone. And we'll see who's available. It's going to be weird because there's a lot of coaching positions open, but there's not a lot of head coach positions open. I believe with the announcement of Dan Bilesma, Disco Dan returning to the NHL, he's going to be the head coach up in Seattle. I think the San Jose Sharks are the only team that doesn't have a head coach right now. So it'll be, if they fire Vincent, it'll be us and the Sharks. The Sharks seem pretty close to hiring their guy. There's a handful of guys that are still out there and available, like Todd McClellan was one guy. There's a couple of other guys. I'm going completely blank on the name of literally everyone right now, but most of the coaching staff, like most of the big name coaches, have been shifted around. So like Sheldon Keefe's gone, Craig Berube's gone, just a bunch of names that I wasn't super enthusiastic about hiring for the Blue Jackets anyway. So I'm interested to see if Waddell has someone in mind or not. I wouldn't be heartbroken if Vincent left. I wouldn't be heartbroken if he stayed. But I do think that he's going to have a very tight leash this season. I think if the Blue Jackets start to look like they're having a truly disastrous season, then I think he might get the hook. Like, genuinely maybe by December. And this is not the Blue Jackets. I don't think are going to be in a playoff spot, or if they do, it'll be a wild card spot that they'll have to fight to get into because the Metro is stupid. But if the Blue Jackets are, if they hit American Thanksgiving, for example, and they are still hanging around, 7 or 8 in the Metropolitan Division, then I could see Vincent getting the hook then. I think he's going to be on a very short leash. So we'll see how it goes, honestly. I keep thinking about like what my knee-jerk reaction is one way or the other towards Vincent staying. And I think my knee-jerk reaction is him staying. Like I said, I think he's going to have a short leash. I don't think he's going to. I don't think he stays past next year anyway, unless like a miracle happens and the Blue Jackets like suddenly magically turn into a contender, like they did in 2017, where they went from picking 3rd overall to finishing with like 104 points in the space of like a season or 2 seasons. But I don't think he stays past next year. If he makes it to October, I don't think he stays to next October, and I feel fine about that. I was enthusiastic for his hire, and I think it's a little bit unfair to judge a guy based on like 1 season of work. So like that's why I'm kind of hedging my bets here. But there was a lot of traits last season that made me worried that like this wasn't a guy floundering because he didn't know what to do. This was a guy whose methods weren't working, if that makes sense. So I'll be interested to see what it looks like if he does in fact make it to October and the Blue Jackets start playing hockey. Are we going to see a different coaching style from Vincent? Are we going to see a different brand of Blue Jackets hockey on the ice? I kind of hope so. They don't even have to be particularly good. I would just like them to be not miserable to watch. My standards are so low right now, but we'll see. Obviously, that's all going to be up to Don Waddell. Like I said, I would be surprised if it wasn't mentioned at the press conference tomorrow, which I will be watching, and we'll bring some little tidbits of that into the conversation. This is probably going to be us for most of the rest of the week. Is going to be talking about Waddell and his new position. So we'll finish up today's episode. Just kind of going over again, and I know I've talked about this a handful of times over the past kind of couple of weeks or so, just a list of things that Waddell needs to sort out. He's got a very long to-do list on his desk, and he hasn't even moved it into his office yet. So we're going to talk about that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're talking about Don Waddell. We're talking about everything that he has to do now because he's got a very long to-do list on his desk right now. Obviously, we covered the Vincent thing. I think the expectation is that he's going to bring someone in as GM, maybe not immediately, but that's definitely, I mean, it's on his list, and I don't know whether that's that he wants to bring, maybe he wants to bring Tulsky over from Carolina. That would be very fun. Whether he's got a candidate that he likes that he wants to bring in and is just waiting for them to become available, whether there's someone that he wants to promote from within. I'll be interested to see who the AGMs are. There's obviously there's a lot of talk about Rick Nash. Trevor Timmons was the AGM in Montreal for a long time and was a guy that I was kind of enthusiastic about maybe getting the job. But he wasn't even. I don't think he was even considered. I remember there was a thing that came out that was like there were no internal discussions about promoting from within for this job, which fine, whatever. But he's an interesting name for potentially taking that next step. He's the director of player development right now, I believe. So he could be up for a job title shuffle. So I don't think it's high on his list, but it's definitely on his list in terms of finding a GM. And then we move on to potentially the biggest part of his to-do list, which is player contracts. So just to do a quick rundown of players that don't have contracts right now. Igor Chinakov, Kromachenko, Alex Nylander, Cole Sillinger, Alexander Texier, Carson Meyer, Jake Bean, Kent Johnson, Moving on to guys that aren't on the roster, Tyler Angle, Josh Dunn, Brendan Gaunce, Marcus Bjork, Jake Christensen, Nick Blankenberg, Billy Sweezy, Jacob Zaboral, Jet Greaves, Malcolm Subban. I imagine some of these guys are moving on. Like, I imagine Jacob Zaboral moves on. Malcolm Subban probably moves on. Carson Meyer might move on. But going back to and just looking at kind of the core players, Chinikov, Mochenko, Nylander, Sillinger, Texier, Bean, and Johnson. That's a lot of players that need new contracts. I would expect most of, if not all of those guys to sign. Question marks on Jake Bean, who obviously struggled with his contract extension in Carolina with Waddell. Again, I don't know how much of that was Waddell and how much of that was Dundon, but that's an interesting name to watch suddenly, especially as the Blue Jackets want to try and make space on the back end for guys like Jiricek and Matejchuk to come up in the ranks. Kromachenko, I kind of talked about this in his season review. He is the priority re-signing for me. I think you want to get him signed to a long-ish term deal and just be done with it. And then everyone else I could see getting kind of bridge deals or 1-year deals, especially, Nylander's going to get a 1-year show me contract. Texier will probably get a 1-year contract. I could see Chinikov, Sillinger, Johnson all getting 2 to maybe 3 years. And then most of the guys that are not like off roster, so like Angle, Dunn, Blankenberg, Christian, etc., they'll probably get one year at league min or a 2-way contract. But lots of work for him to get started with. It's not like it's hey, we're gonna have an easy summer now. He's gone from looking at all of the Carolina Hurricanes contracts that need signing and was like, well, I don't want to do this. This is someone else's job to, actually, I've moved to somewhere that has potentially even more important contracts to re-sign, because a lot of the Carolina Hurricanes are UFAs and older guys. And now he's like, well, I've got to re-sign 50% of this team's young RFA core. The other thing that is not necessarily a Waddell decision, but I've seen Elliot Friedman was talking about it on his podcast a couple of days ago. What do they do with Patrik Laine? Obviously, he's in the NHLPA Player Assistance Program right now. It was announced not announced, but someone found out on Instagram that he's had shoulder surgery very recently, which he broke his collarbone, I think, in the middle of the season. So I wonder if it's just going in to clean out some stuff from that. But he went into the player assistance program like midway through the season, and then they didn't see him again for the rest of the season. So like, is he going to be ready to return? Is he going to stay in the player assistance program? Is he a part of this team moving forward? Like, there's a conversation that has to happen there. I don't know that I would trade Laine away, but I know that I'm potentially the minority in all of that, which I'm fine with. But I think it'll be very interesting to see if this team knows what they have in Laine and whether they can use that $9 million of cap. I wonder if the thinking is that they can use that $9 million of cap space on players like, which I want to issue a correction, by the way, which someone on YouTube very kindly pointed out. I thought that the Patrik Laine's $8.7 million was not covered in the cap hit right now. It is. So instead of what I think I said, that they have $14 million to re-sign all of those RFAs that I mentioned above, they do actually have the full $23 million, which makes me a lot more comfortable in terms of re-signing everyone. Patrik Laine's, the 8.7 is actually on the books right now, because I forgot that when the offseason hits, all of the like buried cap penalties and long-term IR and things like that all go back on the books. So a ton of teams are like over the cap right now. Like Montreal has Carey Price is $10 million on the cap right now, and they're over. But the point is, they could decide that if they want to move on, there's another $9 million that they can use on player contracts. And, we talked about all of those guys that are RFAs this year. Next year, they're going to have to figure out, does Dmitry Voronkov get a new contract? Does Adam Boquist get a new contract? Neil Tarasov is up for extension next season. There's a bunch of guys that are going to be up for contract extension. Then the year after that, you've got to figure out Brindley and Fantilli. So like, there's a lot of decisions that need making for this cap, and I wonder if Patrik Laine is going to be not necessarily a cap casualty, but I do wonder if the team kind of maybe moves on from him. which is not a thought that I expected to finish the episode with when I started, but is kind of where I'm at. That's kind of what I've got for today. Tomorrow, we're actually going to talk to Zach Martin, host of Locked On Hurricanes, and get his kind of inside view of Don Waddell as a GM, how he feels about this hiring, just some kind of a little bit of not inside baseball, but some a little inside view on Don Waddell leaving the Hurricanes and coming to Columbus. So that's going to be tomorrow's episode. Thank you for listening to this episode, for making us your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. Thank you once again for listening. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Instagram and on Twitter. You can email me if you have comments, questions, criticisms at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.